The prairie stretched in endless waves of gold and shadow, the dying sun pouring molten light across the horizon. The wind carried whispers of what had been, sighing through the tall wheat that bent like obedient children, and in the distance, a small cabin leaned wearily against the edge of town. Inside, the widow moved quietly, her hands shaking as they swept dust from a cracked floorboard, rearranged fallen letters, and coaxed a reluctant fire into life. Her name had been spoken in the town only in hushed tones, the widow whose husband had died too suddenly, leaving her to the weight of a world she had never asked to carry. She wore grief like a second skin, stitched tightly around her heart, and yet beneath the trembling hands and tired eyes there lingered a stubborn thread of resilience, a silent refusal to surrender to despair. Her mornings were a ritual of survival. She filled water pails, mended clothes, and tended her small garden with a careful attention that belied her exhaustion. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and lonely. A neighbor boy sometimes appeared at the fence, offering eggs from his mother's chickens, his presence a fleeting reminder that life continued outside her sorrow. The shopkeeper, a stout woman with kind eyes, brought bread on quiet mornings, never questioning, never speaking too much. The widow accepted these gestures with polite nods, her gratitude cloaked beneath a veil of self-sufficiency. She whispered to herself as she worked, a soft chant of endurance, words only she could hear, reminding herself she must manage, must mend, must hold together the fragments of a life abruptly undone. Evenings were the hardest. The sun dipped behind distant hills, shadows pooling in the corners of her cabin. She would light the fire, though it never seemed warm enough, and sit among the remnants of a home she could no longer call complete. Sometimes she allowed herself to open her late husband's diary, reading aloud passages she would never share with anyone else, her voice trembling over lines that carried both love and loss. The wind rattled the windows, as if echoing the tremors of her own heart, and she feared the night, its silence pressing against her like a living thing. In those moments, the solitude felt suffocating, every creak and groan of the cabin a reminder that she faced the world alone. Then, one evening, as the horizon deepened into violet and the first stars shimmered like distant promises, a rider appeared. Dust clung to his boots and coat, his hat tilted against the dying light. He was 34, steady and quiet, his presence neither intrusive nor demanding. He dismounted slowly, surveying the cabin with a gaze that lingered, not with judgment, not with pity, but with recognition. Without a word, he set to work. A loose shutter rattling in the wind was straightened. Firewood that resisted her trembling hands was stacked neatly. Water was drawn from the well and carried to the kitchen. His movements were calm, methodical, like the gentle turning of a page, and she watched him, startled by the absence of condescension in his eyes. Days passed in a slow cadence, measured in shared tasks and quiet understanding. She taught him the rhythms of the cabin, the small domestic rituals she had perfected in her solitude. He showed her patience, a steady strength that never overshadowed her own. They ate at the worn wooden table, silent often, sharing the kind of small, ordinary moments that made loneliness less sharp. The shopkeeper and neighbor boy observed, noticing how her posture softened in his presence, the light returning to her eyes in small increments. She feared attachment, yet the quiet steadiness of his company pulled her toward trust. The storm of her grief softened in these moments, replaced by the delicate bloom of connection. One night, the wind rose, carrying the first rumblings of a storm across the prairie. Rain lashed the cabin, and the roof groaned as a loose beam threatened to give way. Panic surged through her, and she rushed to brace the beam alone, heart hammering in terror. He was there beside her in an instant, hands firm against hers, guiding, steadying. Together they worked, a silent choreography of survival, balancing fear and courage until the cabin endured the storm. They collapsed to the floor, breathless, soaked, hearts pounding. The wind softened outside, leaving the room hushed, the storm passing, but leaving a charged intimacy in its wake. He leaned close, voice low and trembling, carrying the weight of unspoken nights and shared labor. I see you, not just your strength, but your heart, the woman who fought alone and still rises. Her breath caught, tears mingling with the rain clinging to her cheeks, and she felt a fragile, exquisite recognition of being seen, truly seen for the first time. His hand brushed a wet strand of hair from her face, his eyes searching hers with a quiet honesty, every line of his being confessing what words could not fully hold. "I've admired you from the moment I saw the weight you carry," he admitted, "and every day I hoped you'd let me share it." The truth of his voice settled over her like warm sunlight after relentless clouds. She leaned into him, laughter trembling into tears, sobs mingling with whispered relief. The cabin, the storm, the prairie, all of it faded until there was only this. Two hearts, raw and open, learning to beat together. Outside, life continued its quiet watch, the neighbor boy peeking from behind the fence, the shopkeeper pausing mid-step, bearing witness to a miracle born from patience, courage, and the gentle touch of understanding. In that moment, love was not instant, not flashy, but slow, deliberate, and complete, an ember that had burned quietly until it could no longer be contained. And in the hush of a world softened by rain, the widow knew she was no longer alone, and he knew he had found a home in her heart.